I didn't ask to be the one to talk about the chosen one trope. I didn't want to be the one to talk about it. But I'm the only one who can do it. Yeah, that opening was a joke. I hope you realize. So, yes, I want to talk about a trope. And in this case, I want to talk about the trope of chosen ones. And I will tip my hand really early. This is basically going to be an extended justification for why I really don't care for chosen one stories. I don't. And I'm going to try and explain why so that it doesn't just come across as me just poo-pooing an idea. There are reasons that it bothers me as much as it does, again, with many tropes for its ubiquity and overuse, as opposed to the idea inherently. Inherently, there isn't a lot wrong with the idea. In practical matters, and especially how often it shows up in various forms, I do not care for it very much at all. The timing of this largely has to do with we are very soon going to be getting the Doctor Who Centenary Special, Power of the Doctor. And given that it is the final appearance of Jodie Whittaker's 13th Doctor, in addition to the title that has been given for that, it leads me to think that it is going to be touching on and wrapping up the stuff dropped in The Timeless Children, which is effectively a chosen one story, which should bring me to the first thing that I should clarify, just to deal with the pedants in the audience so that you get off my back. Not every chosen one is literally chosen. To explain that, some chosen ones, the choosing of them is incredibly literal, in the sense that they are assigned their role of importance by some higher authority, some mentor figure even, or some kind of choosy artifact that is in some way going to tip the balance of whatever the events are going on. Those are your most literal forms of chosen one. Others are functionally chosen ones, in that the narrative functions the exact same way as if they had been literally chosen, even though nobody actually pointed them and went, "You are the chosen one." And that's where the Doctor falls in. She is effectively a chosen one. Or to take something like the original Dark Crystal film, a character like Jen is basically a chosen one by default. Because the prophecy, and that's another thing I'm going to have to touch on, because I don't like prophecies either, but the reasons I don't like prophecies and chosen ones are very nested subjects, so we are going to be covering both. But the reason Jen is kind of the hero there is because the prophecy that's in play says that a Gelfling will bring about the reunion of the shard to the rest of the crystal. And he is, at least at the start of the film, so far as we're aware, the last Gelfling alive. So he is the chosen one by default, without any prophecy actually naming him in specific. And the Doctor is a little bit similar. She is functionally a chosen one because, as was revealed in The Timeless Children, she is, so far as we are currently aware, absolutely unique, and her very existence reshaped the entire course of the universe. That effectively, narratively, makes her function as a chosen one, again, even though nobody specifically selected her and said, "This is your destiny." So, what's wrong with chosen ones? Actually, let's back up. Why would you do a chosen one story? Well, there's a number of reasons. At this point, chosen one deconstructions are not particularly uncommon. You can oftentimes have a villain that was a previous chosen one, but they turned out to not be the actual one who should have been doing that thing. Or sometimes a villain might be driven to villainy because they thought they deserved to be the chosen one, and then that didn't happen. So chosen ones can not only impact the heroes, but also you can build your villains around it, you can have deconstructions about it, you can have your story be about the chosen one really not wanting to be the chosen one, fighting against it, trying to dodge the responsibility. But ultimately, what I don't like about chosen one stories is they basically tell you at the front end, or at whatever point the chosenness is established, what the overall thing is going to be and what really matters. Now, this is a personal preference. I enjoy, over the course of a story, discovering what it's really about. Because a story might have a surface level of an initial conflict or an internal conundrum for a character, but then by the time it's over, you realize, okay, that was going on, but it was really about some other stuff. And you can go metaphorical with that, or it can turn out literally there's just other stuff going on. But what Chosen Ones and Prophecies do is they lay out, hey, no matter what else goes on over the course of this story, whether we're talking a movie, a TV series, or a long-running book series, no matter what else we deal, this character and or this prophecy, this is what the story is really about, and it's what we're ultimately going to circle back to deal with. Which, first of all, often, to me at least, feels like it diminishes the importance of basically every other character and every other event that doesn't tie directly into the Chosen One or the prophecy. That's just stuff that happens along the way. Now, if you do it well, you can still get people invested in those other characters and those other events. I'm not saying it's impossible to do a Chosen One story well. So don't think that I hate all of them. I am, however, deeply sick of them because they rob me of the discovery of what this is going to be and what direction it's going to go. When something announces a Chosen One or lays out a prophecy, that is the story telling me that's where we're going. And I'm just going to go, oh, okay, it would have been nice to realize on my own where this was going. Not everyone enjoys that. Some people want to know where a thing's going, and that's valid. This is my personal issues with the trope. They don't have to be yours, and if you actually find a benefit in knowing ultimately what the story is going to have to deal with by the end, regardless of what else goes on, and that makes it easier for you to enjoy, awesome. It just doesn't for me. There's also a very common issue with Chosen Ones in that it flattens the characters, and it removes the need to justify a lot of either the character's decisions or the general rolling out of the narrative. It robs those things of their own agency because now it's destiny. And at its worst, you end up with characters that if they weren't the Chosen One, if they weren't basically assigned the role of protagonist by narrative declaration, you wouldn't really care or be following this person. It's often leaned on as a reason to undercharacterize or at least take your sweet time bothering to characterize your lead character. Because you don't have to explain why they're on this quest, why they personally have a character-based reason to want to fight this evil, why they are wrapped up in all this and why they don't make the choice to just run away. It removes your obligation to justify any of those things with a character-based reason because you can just go, well, Chosen One. It often feels like a cheat. And unless you are going to build the entire story around it, and even then, you're not necessarily going to get me on board, but unless you're building the entire story around it, it more often than not just feels like a means to justify why this person is the protagonist rather than anybody else. And this is particularly why prophecies and Chosen One stories can bother me the later into an overall narrative that they get introduced. Because if we're talking, say, a TV series, if we're multiple seasons in and then suddenly we drop a prophecy and or Chosen One, that's not what this has been up to now. And now all of a sudden you're going, and we have now designated the single most important person. I've never taken well to that. I've never taken well to the sense that a writer or a writing team or what have you is telling me who I should care about. I'm not going to argue who the protagonist of a story is. The protagonist is whoever you make it. But to basically make it a narrative decree, this is the most important person and you should care, I kind of instinctively want to fight against that and go, yeah, but why? And again, it very often to me feels like an excuse for why the lead isn't anybody else other than who we have. Or in the case of the Doctor, it's very weird because the Doctor was always the most interesting thing going on in their stories. And then they made them a chosen one anyway, which is, it's still such a bizarre choice to me. Okay, I need to not dwell on that. I'm sure I'll have plenty to say about the Doctor and the Timeless Child thing when Power of the Doctor comes out. So I should table that for now. But sort of coming back to what I said before about how chosen ones and prophecies lay out for you what this is going to be about and where it's going, it also, for me, feels like it narrows down the possibilities that could happen. Now, broadly speaking, if you're in a sort of traditional conflict, good guys versus bad guys, there's honestly only two primary ways that things could go down. The good guys win or the good guys lose. But those two things can take a lot of shapes, and good guys lose rarely happens if we're being honest. But in terms of good guys win, there's still a lot that can happen. They win at what cost? What did they lose along the way? Did they win partially or fully? And the thing about a chosen one and a prophecy is it lays out the specific conditions. So it's not just this is the person fated to be involved in a final conflict. It is laying out the conditions for what victory looks like. And that also applies to even vaguer prophecies that are like, oh, we know it will all center around this person. They will either save us or destroy us. Well, the general tone of the work up to that point should tell you which is the more likely from a narrative perspective. So even that still feels like it's narrowing down the possibilities, because once you open up the can of worms that is a chosen one or a prophecy, there's surprisingly few worms in there. I don't know why I'm sticking with the worms thing, but here we go. There is the prophecy goes through basically as written. The chosen one does exactly what the chosen one has been predicted to do. Next up, and I would say increasingly common, the prophecy does come true, or the chosen one does do what it said they're going to do, but not in the way that most of the characters involved were expecting. This is oftentimes where you get the sort of self-fulfilling prophecy things, where like a villain accidentally causes the prophecy that's going to defeat them to come true, or things of that nature. So that's just two variations of prophecy comes true. And it's pretty rare for prophecy or chosen one to simply not do the thing. But that's kind of the only other option. But again, almost never happens. One way to make this pattern less obvious than it normally is to do what Aladdin did. And that is have a chosen one who does the chosen thing early in the movie. I wonder how many people even remember that Aladdin is a chosen one, because he's the only one who can enter the Cave of Wonders. But he does that a half hour into a 90-minute movie. And so after that, prophecy's fulfilled and the movie can go in any direction. That is kind of a neat have your cake and eat it too option that you don't see often, because most stories hinge their finales on the chosen one or the prophecy. And another thing that really bothers me about chosen one and prophecy narratives is a failure to establish why the authority that this prophecy or choosing is coming down from should be believed or trusted. Now, this applies in more literally chosen characters as opposed to characters chosen by default. So this is something that actually bugged me in The End of Time. That's the Doctor Who two-parter that ended David Tennant's initial run as the Doctor. And that is that the Time Lords are operating on the basis of a prophecy. Now, the Time Lords, depending on when you are watching Doctor Who, either are very mysterious or are surprisingly pedestrian. But this whole idea of this more mystical aspect is not something that's really seriously rooted in most of the canon material. By canon, I mean the TV show. The various things like novels, comics, and whatever are basically canon until they're not, because the show is not obligated to hold true to them. So part of why that really bothered me was that since mysticism of that kind wasn't really firmly established as being part of Time Lord culture. Again, not in the show, and certainly not in the revived version of the show up to that point. The idea of just injecting a prophecy, my first question is, why? Why do you believe this?
Falling, all of it falling. Black and pitch and screaming fire, so burning.
Why are you assuming the correctness of that? And most stories don't bother to establish that. Now, sometimes it doesn't matter. Sometimes all that matters is that certain characters believe it. Now, this usually works better if it is the villain who believes it. So to come back to, say, the Dark Crystal, which, if you hadn't guessed, is an example I am leaning on rather heavily to avoid having to bring up Harry Potter, because otherwise that would be one that I could cite readily in this, but I don't want to. But in the Dark Crystal, again, the thing that matters is less that the prophecy is absolutely true that that a Gelfling will end them, than the fact that the Skeksis believed that enough to wipe out the Gelflings, or at least try to.
Prophecy caused all this trouble.
That prophecy?
Yes!
That's why Skeksis killed Gelfling?
Yes!
So that is a situation where maybe the prophecy is true, maybe it's not, but the actions of the villains who absolutely believed it pushed the story forward. Now, that doesn't suddenly make me like that, because again, that kind of falls into the villains accidentally caused the prophecy themselves sort of thing. But again, to come back to where I was at a minute ago, what is establishing this authority? There's always these notion of these ancient scrolls, these ancient things, or somebody who is all this power declares this or that, or this will happen, or this person has a prophecy, or there's almost no real examination of where these prophecies and where these means to choose someone even come from and why they have authority. Some will engage with that question and actually have characters push back on it, although most often it comes in the shape of the chosen one really not wanting to be chosen, so they push back on the idea, but when that happens, usually nobody else does. And so it's very clearly not a genuine attempt to push back or justify the authority of the prophecy or the chosen one perspective, but instead is an attempt to give some kind of arc to a character who basically has had their entire arc already laid out for them. Most of the ones that I can think that do question this are comedies like the Lego Movie. It ultimately still pans out that Emmett, who was misidentified as a chosen one, does ultimately save the day in a manner very unique to him. So even though that prophecy gets called out as BS, it still functions narratively the exact same as a prophecy that gets fulfilled in a non-standard way. And I can't think of any non-comedic attempts to bring into question the validity of a prophecy. So what I would honestly, what I'd love? It would be awesome if some characters were given a prophecy or told it's this, and somebody within the group, somebody who has established authority, who the audience or the readers or the viewers or whatever has a reason to believe and trust, reads out this prophecy or finds out it's something that's guiding the actions of somebody, villains or heroes, and then just scoffs, crumples it up, and throws it away. You're going, that's just some random nonsense somebody wrote down. Because unless you justify why this is correct, yeah, it's some random nonsense somebody wrote down. And again, some things do engage a little bit, or at least try and create within their settings a reason why the source is something to be believed, but much like not needing to justify the actions of your hero anymore once they are designated protagonists by default, a lot will just not bother. The word prophecy comes up, and because of the narrative way in which prophecies are used, i.e. to lay out how things are supposed to go from here on out with only the slight variations that I talked about already, then there's just an expectation that the audience, they know how prophecies work. We've told them this is a prophecy. Doing a prophecy story now. But that's a meta justification. So few bother to actually justify and grapple with it in universe, in narrative. So again, it feels like a means to skip a lot of steps, to gloss over a lot of stuff. And I'm not even going to say that that is an inherently bad thing, because sometimes, if you're telling a certain story, there are certain things that just don't interest you as a storyteller, that you don't want to have to deal with, or you can't figure out an interesting way to justify, and so you take a shortcut. And that's the thing. For me, in the end, Chosen Ones and Prophecies feel like shortcuts. And I understand why shortcuts exist, and I'm not going to say there's never a reason to use them. But when it seems like the shortcut gets used over and over and over and over again, well, that's just becoming just another standard path, isn't it? Prophecies, Chosen Ones, they are narrative tools that, from my experience, are used in frustratingly limited ways. Because there are more things that could be done with these than usually are. But as with most tropes, generally, once invoked, there's a very clear funnel that this story and these characters are now going to go down, and it's one I've seen and read and heard and am, at this point, very, very bored by. I want to see a story that unravels because the characters make decisions that make sense to them, not because destiny has put its hand on the scale. When I was younger, I had more of appreciation of a sense of destiny and fate. And it still can work, especially if you're going with a little bit of a tragic angle. Because I can think back to, this is going to be a weird movie to pull, but I'll mention it anyway. One of the things I really enjoyed about seeing Peter Jackson's King Kong in the theater was that it played best assuming you knew how the original King Kong went. And so there was a sense of tragic inevitability to it. Kind of in the way how Romeo and Juliet starts by a narrator literally telling you this will end in both characters' deaths. So you already know where it's going. And so the tragedy comes in watching people try to avoid this, but you know it's coming anyway. And I did once have an appreciation for that. I've lost it. And maybe it's age, bitterness. Maybe it's, having spent enough time doing my own writing to just see how much of an easy cheat it can be if you don't seriously explore the concepts. But for whatever reason, I'm over it. I hear the word prophecy. I see a character functionally become a chosen one by structure of the narrative or by oftentimes by reveal of their past. I kind of check out mentally. I'm just bored. I've seen this story. I played this game. And I'm not saying it was never good, but I'm done. I'm over it. And maybe others are too, or maybe others deeply love Chosen One stories. And in the latter case, I hope you can now at least understand a little better why I don't. And again, I know I said it during the thing. I'm not saying there is no such thing as a good Chosen One story. Most tropes are not a problem in and of themselves. They are a problem as they become standard, as they become common, as they become so clearly used the same way pretty much every time with little variation, or in the case of this, as we have entered the era of trying to subvert Chosen One expectations, very formulaic deviations. I think that's the thing. Chosen Ones feel so played out to me at this point that even if it tries to subvert the way a Chosen One story works, I still feel like I already know what that's going to look like. And I'd just rather not. I would just rather not. This is part of why when I sat down eventually and wrote my own fantasy novel, link to buy that in the description, I focused on what I considered small people in a big world. Because when you deal with prophecies and Chosen Ones, you are dealing with the people who reshape everything. You are dealing with the names that will be remembered by history. And I think being tired of that is part of why when I wrote Dreams of Fire, I'm like, I am focusing on people who will never get more than a tiny footnote in a history book. Because ultimately they're not important from any grand historical or mythical perspective. but they still have good stories to tell. That's where I'm at in my hopes. I can still find some enjoyment of stories of grand figures, but if we could keep the chosen oneness out of that, I'll have a better chance of enjoying those things. So that's me. Has anything that I've said made any kind of sense to you? Are you where I'm at? Are you somewhere else? Do you think what I said makes no sense? Whatever your thoughts are, drop something down in the comments and let us talk about it. Patreon is what pays the bills, enables me to do this as my living, spend my time thinking about these things, thinking about how I want to share these things with you, and also gave me enough time to, actually get my friggin' book published. So there's a lot that is able to happen because of the support on Patreon. Even if you're not able to help me that way, like, share, subscribe also are of great assistance. At the end of all this, though, what I really want you to remember is that you are beautiful, you are valid, and you are loved. You are the council. I'm only running the meetings. And until next time, this council is adjourned. All right, time to thank my highest supporting patrons: Robin Moore, Zubin Lutfullah, Tarak, the thing that goes doink in the anime, Oliver B., Melinda Walters, Emu Delkey, Leotha Boyd, Toy Loli, Becky Sparks, Phrenobulax, The Poodle, Zach, Bookworm, Tracy Scrabbit, Angry Casperol, Adam R.D.L. Taylor, Shayla Gourlay, Brendan LaRose, and TT. Thank you for your support. If you want to hear me try and say your name while this little guy tries to chew on my earrings, well, you can check out the Patreon for the support tiers that get you a shout out. Thanks so much. You are a pain in my butt.